Rather, he chose to be true to his soul, to proclaim God's goodness and love to all of the people, not just to the rich and the privileged. He said this banquet of life is meant for everyone. And he proclaimed this, and the privileged weren't exactly thrilled with his message. They found it subversive, and this was the penalty, this terrible form of state terror, death by execution. But Jesus had to choose, and so he chose to enter into his suffering with as much integrity and authenticity as he could, trusting that this suffering would lead to new life. We're the new life that his suffering led to. Jesus had a deep trust that there would be a new order, a new creation emerge if he went deeply into his suffering, that God wouldn't let that be the last word. The story of Easter is a vindication and validation of Jesus' belief that he could trust God to go into this suffering and that God would bring a new order out of his suffering. This temptation to glorify suffering insinuates itself in more subtle ways than just the story I told you about not only Mother Teresa, but a whole tradition, the whole Puritan tradition, and some of those medieval traditions where self-flagellation was part of Christian practice. You see, at a personal level, our egos love to wallow in our suffering, don't they? Let me go out on a limb here and suggest that 80% of our personal suffering is self-inflicted, self-generated. We fall in love with the narrative of how we've been victimized by our families, by society, by our abusers. And we confuse this story, which is a partial take on reality, with the whole truth about reality. Yes, we were hurt. Yes, at the time we were helpless victims. Yes, sometimes life is deeply unfair. And the pain and trauma that we experience actually even, lays a path down in our neural networks. All of that's true. And then the slightest thing triggers us, doesn't it? We're sure that that person was ignoring us. They looked the wrong way. They raised their eyebrow just the wrong way. And then the biochemistry in our brain gets triggered, and all the stories that our ego is told about how unfair the world is and how everyone's mean to us, and all the old feelings in our gut come rushing to the surface. And we convince ourselves that once again we've been victimized, and we go deep into that story. We can't even imagine that we might have contributed to setting the whole drama up in some way. And this gives us, in our own mind, the right to pay back, to get even, to start drinking again, to go into a deep, dark depression, to start drinking, to eat a quart of ice cream, whatever our favorite way is. And generally what happens is that we bring even more suffering upon ourselves and more suffering to those who care for us. We've all experienced this. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. I've experienced it, certainly. I do this. But think about it. If you are the common denominator in all these experiences that are repeatedly happening to you, if you find yourself saying, why is this always happening to me? It must be bad karma. I can't seem to get out of it. If you are the common denominator, then you might just have something to do with it. That's when it's time to find a trusted counselor, a spiritual companion. Deal with the original cause of your suffering, not the symptoms. And then let it go, because life is way too short, friends. You could spend your whole life gnawing away at the narrative of your suffering and your victimhood. People do this. They think it gives their life meaning. We need to use our own suffering in order to get through it, to open our hearts to a deep compassion for others. This is one of the most compelling reasons, by the way, to learn the habit of forgiveness, because If you're in the habit of forgiving when something that happens to us that we feel like we've been victimized and we just decide, okay, I'm just going to forgive, it gives us a moment to take a deep breath and consider the possibility that in some kind of way we participated in the experience that we just had. It gives you just a moment of forgiveness, because if you're in the habit of forgiving when something that happens to us that we feel like we've been victimized and we just decide, okay, I'm just going to forgive, it gives us a moment to take a deep breath and consider the possibility that in some kind of way we participated in the experience that we just had. It gives you just a moment to breathe and be reflective about the experience. Even if it's not your responsibility, friends, start from the premise that it just might be. It could be. I'm not talking about the experience of the original trauma when we really were victimized. I'm talking about what we did with that trauma, the meanings we made, the interpretations we made about reality, the judgments we made, and then how we defended ourselves against it, and how that defense actually creates more suffering in the world and in our own lives. Reflect on that. Followers of Christ are willing to just step back when they're suffering and take a good, hard, deep look at their own role in it. I can't state this enough. Our egos love this stuff. It's juicy, it's passionate, it feels like life, but make no mistake, it is death. So much energy goes into this. And so what I'm saying is there's genuine suffering. We need to go deep into it and trust that God is with us. And then there's neurotic suffering, and we need to get over it because we need all of that energy to love the world back into health. So many congregations run aground on the shoals of neurotic suffering. I've seen it over and over and over again. Good people get together to do good things for the world, and they end up causing more suffering than they've ever alleviated. And if we haven't done our deep work, when we get under stress, we regress to this place of a survival mode, and we become mean-spirited and ungenerous, and we start making interpretations, and it can be really hurtful. That's why I love having recovering addicts in the congregation. The people who are recovering from addictions. I think they have the power to heal a congregation. Every congregation should have a few of these people, I think. Do you know why? Because they're working the program. They're doing their work. 12 steps, right? They're going into it. And they got friends calling the BS when they're into their BS, and they're saying, that's just not true. Don't deal with the symptoms. Deal with the cause of your suffering. Go back into it. Feel it. Get in touch with all what you did around your original suffering and how you're reenacting that story over and over again, and get over it. They're not let off the hook. And so when you come into the presence of someone who really is working the program, you feel like you're in the presence of an authentic person. You can relax with them. They've been liberated. And the great thing about this is, they're not just liberated so that they're healed themselves. Right? After a certain period, they become mentors for others to help them make the journey. The AA movement was founded, I think, by two Methodists. And they knew that life in Christ didn't involve just getting ourselves healed. It involved being a healing presence for others. Getting through our suffering so that we could be there for the suffering of others. Look at what happened to Moses in this story of the burning bush.